Since the turn of the millennium, Nigeria has been the scene of a slow, brutal unraveling for many Christian communities, a pattern of killings and displacement that is rooted in politics, religion, and deep socio-economic stress. In this narration, I'll trace the arc from local grievances to insurgency, explain how politics and weak institutions have amplified sectarian fault lines, and show why climate, poverty, and impunity turned disputes over land and livelihoods into lethal attacks on churches, villages, and families. The story begins not with a single group but with a mix of drivers that converged after 1999, when Nigeria returned to civilian rule and several northern states began adopting Sharia law. That legal shift sharpened religious identity politics, creating an environment where communal tensions could more easily morph into violent clashes. Human Rights Watch documented early waves of massacres and a pattern of non-prosecution that taught armed actors they could attack with little fear of accountability, setting a dangerous precedent for the years to follow. Into that permissive environment stepped organized insurgency. From about 2009, Boko Haram exploded from a fringe militant movement into a mass casualty threat, explicitly targeting churches and Christian communities alongside schools, markets, and government targets. International organizations documented widespread atrocities, indiscriminate killings, abductions, and attacks that deliberately sought to terrorize civilian populations, and concluded that these acts amounted to war crimes. The rise of jihadist violence both radicalized and displaced whole regions, forcing Christians in the northeast to flee or confront an enemy that attacked not because of private disputes, but for strategic, ideological reasons. At the same time, a separate but overlapping wave of violence spread across Nigeria's central middle belt, where the fault lines are less about theology and more about land, grazing, and identity. Climate change, desertification, and population pressure pushed Fulani pastoralists further south in search of pasture, bringing them into repeated conflict with predominantly Christian farmers. What began as resource competition became ethnicized and then sectarian, amplified by weak local governance and the proliferation of small, heavily armed militias. ACLED and other data projects recorded a steep rise in attacks on Christian communities from 2020 onward, demonstrating that the violence is not confined to one group or one tactic, but has become part of a nationwide uptick in civilian targeting. Politically, the violence has been both produced and perpetuated by fragile state institutions. Police and military responses have often been slow, poorly coordinated, or corrupted. Prosecutions are rare, and local political elites sometimes exploit communal grievances for electoral advantage. Reports by Nigerian and international researchers have described patterns where political patronage, local power imbalances, and deliberate under-enforcement of the law created zones of impunity, allowing attacks on Christian villages and churches to continue without meaningful redress. Where citizens cannot rely on the state for protection, communities either arm themselves, forming vigilante groups that provoke further reprisals, or they flee, producing waves of internally displaced people and fractured livelihoods. The human toll is difficult to measure precisely, but multiple independent counts and NGO reports indicate tens of thousands of Christian deaths, as well as millions displaced. Nigerian NGOs and faith-based groups have produced high casualty estimates, while global monitors have repeatedly named Nigeria among the worst places for Christian persecution in recent years. These numbers are contested and politically charged. Some actors amplify them to generate international pressure, while others question methodology. But the convergence of reporting from local investigators, ACLED datasets, and human rights organizations makes clear that the scale is tragic and sustained. Religiously, the pattern cannot be reduced to a simple binary of Muslim versus Christian. In many places, the attacks are opportunistic. Armed groups exploit religious difference when it serves their strategic goals, whether those goals are territorial control, economic gain, or political intimidation. Boko Haram's ideology is explicitly religious and transnational. The Middle Belt violence is often rooted in local competition and identity, and both can overlap when armed groups recruit along ethnic or sectarian lines. Churches, because they are visible community hubs, become symbolic targets. Destroying a church sends a message deeper than killing individuals. Scholarly analysis of church attacks shows that sacred spaces are targeted to shatter communal morale and to force migration from contested territories. Socioeconomic forces are the force multiplier. Poverty, youth unemployment, and the collapse of traditional livelihoods create foot soldiers for both criminal gangs and ideological movements. Competition over shrinking arable land and dwindling water resources, driven in part by climate trends, turns seasonal grazing routes into flashpoints. Where governance fails to deliver equitable access to resources, identity becomes the organizing principle for survival. Economically marginal communities, many of them Christian farmers in the Middle Belt, find themselves vulnerable to raids that are framed locally as ethnic or religious but are often motivated by the immediate calculus of cattle, crops, and stolen assets. International reactions have been uneven. Human rights organizations, faith groups, and some governments have raised alarms, documented abuses, and urged accountability, but geopolitical priorities and the complexity of Nigeria's conflicts have limited sustained, coercive, international intervention. At home, civil society and church networks play vital roles in relief and documentation, while many survivors remain reliant on informal support and on faith communities to rebuild. The lack of a consistent, transparent process of justice has reinforced feelings of abandonment among victims and allowed narratives of persecution to be instrumentalized by political actors abroad and at home. So what does this mean going forward? First, security responses must be paired with governance reforms, better policing, impartial prosecutions, and genuine enforcement of anti-grazing and land use laws. Second, development interventions must target the root socio-economic drivers: land reform, climate-resilient agriculture, youth employment, to remove the incentives for violence. Third, interfaith political leadership is essential to reduce identity-based exploitation and to build inclusive institutions that protect minorities. Without that three-pronged approach, security, development, and political reform, the cycle of attacks on Christian communities is likely to persist, morphing as new groups and grievances emerge. Killings of Christians in Nigeria since 2000 are neither the result of a single conspiracy nor merely isolated criminal acts. They are the product of historical grievances, institutional failure, resource stress, and the rise of armed groups that weaponize identity for strategic ends. Understanding that complexity is the first step toward coherent policy, effective protection, and meaningful solidarity with victims who, year after year, continue to pay the highest price. To touch on 2025 alone, in mid-June 2025 in the village of Yelwata, in Benue State, between 100 and 200 Christian villagers, often internally displaced people sheltering at a Catholic mission, were killed over the night of June 13 of 14. What caused this massacre? On one level, it fits the pattern of herders-farmer, land use, and identity conflict in Nigeria's Middle Belt. Christian communities in Benue regularly clash with armed Fulani militants who are often Muslim and who are moving in search of grazing land. Environmental pressures, desert encroachment, drought, less pasture, push herders southwards, increasing competition over land. But beyond that, this attack appears to be more than just competition. It was large, sudden, focused, and included internally displaced families, raising questions of whether it was intended to terrorize or displace Christian populations in contested areas. There have been multiple coordinated attacks in early to mid-2025 across central Nigerian states such as Plateau, Benue, Nasarawa, and Ebonyi. Dozens or hundreds killed in single attacks on villages, attacks sometimes simultaneous on many villages. For example, Fulani herdsmen are reported to have killed at least 16 Christians in Ebonyi State in early February 2025, burning homes after accusing villagers of killing cattle. In Plateau and Benue, attacks on clusters of villages displaced thousands and left many dead. What caused this wave? The causes are similar in structure to the Yelwata massacre but have additional immediacy. First, the sharpening of land disputes. As pasture land shrinks, herders increasingly force routes through or close to farming communities. Then there are clashes over alleged theft or death of livestock, with accusations that sometimes trigger revenge attacks. Weak or delayed government response in many rural areas creates zones where militias or armed herdsmen can operate with little fear of being stopped. Also, in some cases, local vigilante responses or community defense provoke reprisals. Many of the victims are Christian because they are in farming areas. Their settlements are less fortified. They are the ones with land under pressure. A broader, more alarming pattern is reflected in recent reports. By August 2025, roughly 7,087 Christians were reported killed in Nigeria in just over 7 months, with another roughly 7,800 abducted. This is not one single massacre but a cumulative effect of many attacks. On villages, during farm work, while traveling, even at places of worship. It includes both large-scale massacres, like Yelwata, and smaller, frequent raids. What is driving this surge? Multiple factors. Increased activity of jihadist groups, including Boko Haram, ISWAP in the north and northeast, Fulani militia or herder militias in Middle Belt states acting with greater lethality, worsening climate pressures and land degradation, pushing conflict between herdsmen and farmers, increasing impunity, perpetrators rarely punished, insecurity in remote areas, proliferation of arms, and sometimes political neglect or inability of state security forces to respond effectively. Christian communities tend to be caught in the crosshairs because many of them are farmers, villagers, with fewer defenses, and located in vulnerable zones. The common driver for these attacks is that in all 3 cases, these features emerge: contested land and water resources, environmental stress, weak or absent security response, religious and ethnic identities become markers for who is vulnerable, and a pattern of displacement, mass killing, and abduction, rather than isolated criminal acts.